Hello, my name is Skutlist, and for this video I'd like to discuss the possible benefits of Dynasty Warriors 9's open-world gameplay and character-specific stories for two specific characters, Guan Suo and Bao Sanniang. Perhaps Suo is a somewhat odd character to be talking about, as he seems to be rather unpopular. Indeed, he tends to place quite low in official popularity polls. I believe he was 62nd in the Dynasty Warriors 7 popularity poll held at Game City, and slipped further down to 67th in the Dynasty Warriors 8 Extreme Legends popularity poll. And these positions are, in my opinion, rightfully deserved. Guan Suo, as he is right now, is not a good character in Dynasty Warriors. In fact, I'm not sure if I've even met anyone who claimed to be a fan of the character. But at the same time, I feel that Suo has a lot of untapped potential to him, and with the shift to open world, as well as the return to character-specific stories rather than faction stories, there's much Suo could gain in Dynasty Warriors 9 as a character. Okay, let's start this off. First off, I trust that you're aware that Guan Suo is a fictional character. Guan Yu never had a son named Suo in actual history. Suo comes from a fictional work known as the Guan Suo Juan. Not 100% sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but whatever, let's just go with that pronunciation. It is technically called a biography, but it is not, I stress, it is not a historical document. Let me briefly summarize the beginning of this work of fiction. Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei had made their oath of sworn brotherhood. After doing so, they wanted to make their new family ties official by getting rid of their old families. Liu Bei had no wife or children, so he was fine. So in order to get rid of Guan Yu and Zhang Fei's respective old families, they invited them to a banquet for the purpose of killing them. So yeah, in this story, the three sworn brothers were not just bros before hoes, they were also bros before wives, children, and other people you're supposed to love. Anyway, getting back to the story. At one point during the slaughter of their old families, Zhang Fei saw a pregnant woman, possibly a mistress of Guan Yu. He couldn't find it in himself to slay this woman, and so he spared her life, letting her escape the incident. This woman would later give birth to a son. The son lived with his mother until he was about 7 years old, at which point he became stranded from her. He was picked up by a man named Squire Suo, who was a follower from a man named Hua Yui. Hua Yui later told Squire Suo to adopt the young boy as his own son, and the boy was given the name Suo Tong. With his adoptive father and Hua Yui, Suo Tong studied martial arts until he was 18. There came a day when Hua Yui spoke of the potential the young Suo Tong had, and Suo Tong left to make a name for himself. He reunites with his mother, who tells him that his birth father was Guan Yu. Wanting to meet his real father, he sets out to find him, and he renames himself Guan Suo to honor the prominent men in his life. That's about it for my summary of the early parts of the story. So let's talk about his story in relation to Dynasty Warriors 9's open world and character stories. The way Suo's story starts up in the novel could gel very well with the concept of an open world. His personal story in Dynasty Warriors 9 could start out with learning about his true heritage and beginning to journey around China in hopes of finding his birth father. Hopefully we could omit that ridiculous story about exterminating the old families, but moving on. Suo could be journeying around, piecing together stories of his biological father's feats in battle as he tries to track down his father, as he, Liu Bei, and Zhang Fei are having that wandering lifestyle. During this time, he'd have some nice moments for growth and character development, things he didn't really have much of a chance to have in 7 and 8. They may need to invent a few filler battles for him to participate in during the early portion of the game for game pacing purposes, but that'll end when he eventually meets his father for the first time, maybe shortly before Fawn Castle. And this could, in itself, lead to more story possibilities. The idea that Suo was raised apart from the rest of his family begs the question of how his siblings, Ping, Xing, and Yin Ping, might respond to this new full-grown brother they suddenly have. It would be a nice chance to see Guan Yu's kids in a new narrative context. One of the more common criticisms with how the characters of the Guan spawns are written is that they spend too much time just praising their father over and over again. Guan Xing avoids a bit of the complaints because he does have his friendship with Zhang Bao going on, but it's still a complaint I frequently see directed at Guan Yu's kids in this franchise. A series of scenes where Guan Suo is a bit tentative with his siblings, not sure if he's really fitting in with them, could be a nice little subplot to go on between the siblings. I'll make specific note of Suo's potential relationship with his sister, Yin Ping. Considering the timing of when Ping and Xing die, we would only have so much time to see Suo interacting with them. But Suo and Yin Ping would survive all the way to Chengdu being conquered by Wei/Jin, and logically both of their stories would also stretch that far as well. That's plenty of time to write some warm and fluffy sibling bond story between the two, and that would also be the sort of story that would have been rather difficult to write for fairly minor characters like Suo and Yin Ping in the older faction-based stories of 7 and 8. The fact that the Shu story in the last two main installments stopped at the Wuzhong Plains didn't exactly help there. Of course, for all the possibilities there may be for Suo's character, there's also always the chance that Guan Suo's personal story in Dynasty Warriors 9 will start right before Fawn Castle, he's with Guan Yu, and all evidence would suggest that he was raised by Guan Yu, largely like it was in the past two main entries in the franchise, which would really be annoying looking at this big novel they could pull from to help Guan Suo's character, but it's wise to always be prepared for the possibility you don't want. Though to be fair, they shouldn't try to pull too much from the novel, as it does, at times, read like a really, really bad Gary Sue fanfiction. At times it can be, "Whoa! My OC Guan Suo is a master combatant who's so badass and undefeatable. He's amassed legions of followers. Loads of hot women fall in love with him." Though on the subject of hot women, let's change subjects now and talk about Guan Suo's love interest in Dynasty Warriors, Bao Sanniang. First things first, in the novel, Guan Suo engages in polygamy. In the novel, he had 3 wives, and there's another work of fiction that gives him another wife. At this time, Dynasty Warriors only has one of these wives present. Perhaps the others, namely the Wang sisters and Hua Man, may be added to the franchise someday. But for now, let's just discuss the one currently in DW for now, Bao Sanniang, who was probably the most interesting of his wives in the novel. Let's discuss her role in the novel briefly. Before we get started with that, let me stress that, like Guan Suo, she is 100% fictional, and anything I say here shouldn't be thought about for historical discussions regarding the time period. I feel the need to emphasize this in particular because some years back they found a grave dating back to the Three Kingdoms time period that had an unmarked female corpse in it, and some people, with no real evidence to back up the claim, were saying that they had found Bao Sanniang's grave. So, we're clear that she's completely fictional? Good. In the novel, Bao Sanniang lived with 2 brothers and a father in the land of Nanshan. The Bao family had taken control of the land after driving off the previous owner, Lian Kong. While I say the Bao family drove Lian Kong off, it was actually primarily the work of Bao Sanniang. Sanniang had many would-be suitors, but she refused to marry anyone who could not defeat her in battle. Guan Suo meets the former lord of the land, Lian Kong, during his quest to find his father. From Lian Kong, he learns of this warrior family, most notably the powerful daughter of the family. Intrigued, he sets out to find them, and ends up fighting the other members of Sanniang's family. Suo defeats Sanniang's father and both of her brothers quite easily. To save their lives, they offer Sanniang to Suo as a wife. Accepting the offer, Suo lets them leave. Later, Sanniang is not pleased at all with what has happened, especially since she was the best warrior in the family, and sets out to duel Guan Suo. She meets and battles Suo, and, true to her reputation, proves to be a much more challenging opponent for Suo than the rest of her family had been. In the end, Suo only barely manages to defeat her, whereas he had rather easily defeated the rest of her family. After her defeat, she becomes his wife, leaving her family and traveling with Suo. Now, the story of how Sanniang meets and marries Guan Suo is nothing new to me. I've seen my share of best her to bed her stories. But this story of how they meet and come together would still be more interesting than how her relationship with Suo currently works in Dynasty Warriors. The explanation we were given in 7 was that Sanniang found Suo being pursued by Wu soldiers after Fon Castle, and Sanniang decides to save Suo and follow him simply because she thinks he's cute. I think that was more or less it. Plus, with personal stories returning in DW9, it allows Sanniang at least 1 or 2 battles just for herself and her story. If they draw from her story in the novel, at least. A battle where she and her family eject Lian Kong from the land of Nanshan, a battle we've never seen in this franchise before, I might add, and maybe also a battle that mostly amounts to a duel against Guan Suo. Unfortunately, the latter could end up being one of those things that annoys me about video games. Those situations of, you won! Oh, wait, no you didn't. You, the player, as Sanniang, would defeat Suo in gameplay, but then Suo would just pull some Hollywood cheap shots in the following cutscene and win the duel. Stuff like that always gets on my nerves in games, but whatever, moving on. In the novel, after Guan Suo meets his father, Bao Sanniang becomes a part of the Shu forces, and she continues to be a loyal general of Shu until Suo dies in battle. After Suo dies, she leaves the entire conflict behind her, returning to her family and their lands. Translate that to Dynasty Warriors, and it would probably be that Chengdu is conquered and Suo was killed in the attempted defense, but Sanniang herself survives the battle. But in light of Suo's death, she decides to leave the conflict behind her. Perhaps there could be a point where Jiang Wei tries to have her continue to support him in resisting Wei and creating the land of benevolence, but she adamantly refuses to follow Jiang Wei in continuing his crusade and just leaves. Much like Suo, open world and personal character stories offer up a great many possibilities for Sanniang's character, more so in the early part of her story. Sadly, much as I raised the possibility previously that Suo's story may work more or less the same he worked in previous entries in the franchise, the idea that Sanniang's story will just work as it did in previous installments is definitely there. Perhaps Sanniang will meet Suo the same way she did in DW7, which I described earlier, but to repeat, she follows Suo just because she thinks he's cute. Which is a shame. Much like Suo, I'd say that Sanniang is really up there on the list of DW characters who have potential that Koei Tecmo just isn't really making much use of. But anyway, that about wraps up the stuff I wanted to talk about in this video. As it stands right now, Guan Suo and Bao Sanniang aren't the best characters in DW's roster, but they honestly have lots of potential. I play devil's advocate with Suo more than once because I can tell the sort of character he could potentially be. So, that'll be it. I'm Scutlist, and I hope you enjoyed my sort of unrefined thoughts of how these two specific characters could benefit from DW9's new open world and old character-specific stories. And I hope to see you again in whatever my next video will be. So long.